Every now and then, I end up forgetting one of the important lessons I've learned in life. And specifically, in this case, I'm referring to the lesson of not talking to people about certain subjects when you know not only is there not going to be any consensus, but they basically live on a different planet in a different dimension compared to you. There's no way of connecting whatsoever. There's no way of building a bridge. But sometimes, as I said, I forget these lessons. But a while back, I decided to weigh in on a topic near and dear to my heart. And there's a question about how women are not encouraged, or specifically girls, in the classroom in terms of their confidence, in terms of building their ability to express themselves and this sort of thing. Yeah? And sometimes I can be subtle, and sometimes I'm as subtle as a sledgehammer. And it is true, and I've been accused of this, that you kind of need a certain touch to reach the normie, so to speak. You need a certain delicate touch to sort of build bridges, to sort of put together the pieces so normal people get things. And sometimes I'm willing to do that. And sometimes I'm not. In this instance, I was not. I said, essentially, that the reason why women on average in the classroom and elsewhere are not, quote unquote, confident, and not particularly the type of people who speak up or who are assertive, is because that serves no reproductive end whatsoever. Now, you can imagine the amount of surprise the individuals in this conversation were feeling when I mentioned that, because for normies, they don't put that together whatsoever. They don't put two and two together. They cannot. Me saying that the reason why women and girls are less assertive and less confident than men is because there is no reproductive utility for them to be such makes no sense to normies. So I tried to lay it out in the following way. I said, look, every important human behavior that you can observe that matters in terms of outcomes is almost certainly invariably going to be connected to baseline reproductive behaviors, instincts, needs, and this sort of thing. And it's simply a fact, and you can check yourself as a male, that if you were to ask men out there, the vast majority of men, if you were to ask them, look, is confidence and assertiveness in a woman important to them? They would not only say no, if anything, they'd probably say the opposite. Most men prefer demure, agreeable, quiet women. You know, the really loud ones, those are the ones typically that men don't like. And effectively what you have here, when you're looking at the modern woman or the modern man, is the byproduct of a incredibly long concatenation of causal events going way, way back to our earliest mammalian ancestors that selected for men that on average were more confident, if you want to use that term, more assertive, more competitive, and women who are more demure, more quiet, more agreeable, and this sort of thing. And this really rubbed these people the wrong way. In fact, it usually does, because I always then get the accusation that I'm being reductionist. Anytime you bring up biology to these people, anytime you bring up our own evolved past and how it almost certainly, even now, has a pretty big impact on how we are and how we behave, they will say, you're being overly reductionistic. To this, I simply answer, I'm not being reductionistic, I'm being realistic. It's not reductionist, it's reality. And here's the thing. It's not that the environment has no impact. In fact, we can make note of this in the context of, say, the United States, where the classroom writ large has been basically turned into a pro-female environment, and girls are doing very well in school, and conversely, boys are not doing very well in school. We all know this, the boy crisis that's been going on for at least 15 years, maybe even longer. But that only does so much. Again, the behaviors that you observe in human beings, the most important ones, are going to be related to the most important reproductive traits that one sex values than the other, and vice versa. Again, men prefer women who are more agreeable, quiet, demure. Women prefer men who are confident, assertive, blah, 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 because all these things serve as proxies for certain types of reproductive outcomes. In the case of women favoring, quote unquote, confidence, they want a man who can procure resources, take care of them, protect, blah, blah, blah. And it is just a fact that we cannot escape this. So then these people will say, well, it's actually a lot more complex than that. And they invoke things like complexity and complex systems, or emergence and or emergent complexity. And yeah, there are a lot of complex things out there, and there's a lot of complexity that is based upon small, if not tiny, building blocks that in their sum total turn to something very complex. And yeah, human beings are another example of that. But the problem here is that even though you have a lot of inputs going into the modern human being, the inputs need to go into something, right? It's our hardware that goes way back into the past. And yes, there are new software programs being uploaded all the time, but a computer is only as good as its hardware is at the end of the day. And the same is true of human beings. Whatever software you're going to put into the human being can only interact to a degree with the hardware. And frankly speaking, these behavioral traits are part of our hardware, basically. Because no matter what software you put in there, inject there, you can only tinker it and do little things here and there. If your GPU is not particularly good, it's not going to be able to render the top quality game very well. You're going to have to play on lower settings. The same is true of human beings. Now, there is some flexibility, obviously. But after so many years of discussing these topics, not just here, but also with people, whether privately or in a more open forum, I am just a little bit tired of the claim that talking about biology and talking about our evolved nature is somehow reductionistic. For the most part, because what I think is happening is that a lot of normies see that as a kind of cop-out, i.e., to go back to an earlier video of mine from not too long ago, you're just describing things. You're just being descriptive. That's the nicest thing anyone ever says to me. A good friend of mine always says it. You're just being descriptive. But what about ideals? What about the things that you can or should strive for? Well, I don't know about striving for things. Maybe I'm just too jaded for that. But I do think that if you have some large-scale goal in mind, you would really be remiss in not taking into account certain realities on the ground, i.e., human beings are a certain way for certain reasons. And unfortunately, there's no way getting past this. And this sadly creates essentially an unbreakable barrier between the normie and you, if you're interested in these topics, and see human beings in a different light. As far as I can tell, because I really feel a bit like an alien species compared to some of these people, not because I'm particularly wise or enlightened, but just because I see human beings fundamentally differently. As far as I can tell, humans are not animals in their view. That's obviously the case. But also, we're sort of bits and pieces of our environment, our upbringing, the school we went to, the jobs we had, the friends we had, the bong we smoked or didn't smoke, whatever it might be. Essentially, to the normie, the human being is simply a sum of his experiences, but not a sum of his biology, not the sum of pre-programming that he's not aware of or conscious of. We're just sort of the sum of our experiences. And I've listened to normies all my life. I have a relative, and when he tries to understand people in his family, he would always sort of talk about their particular formative experiences as the reason for them being the way they are, which is a classic normie take. He's a good guy, mind you. I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but he would never talk about the heritability of certain familial traits. He would never talk about the genes, or maybe just plain old, hey, we're a bunch of animals. So that's how the normie thinks. And unfortunately, you can also apply this to multitudes of topics, right? A lot of people find, for example, the topic of lookism to be repellent or unnecessarily reductionistic, to use that term again. And why they find that? Well, because again, it gets to the nuts and bolts. Mind you, normies don't really feel that way about other subjects because it doesn't really involve human beings. If you were to tell a normie about an automobile and that there's some problem with the carburetor, which has knock-on effects throughout the rest of the automobile, they're not going to get too upset. If you tell a normie that the reason why Jill behaves in X way and John behaves in Y way is because it's reproductively beneficial to them, or it was at least in terms of their ancestors, then they get upset. This is always the problem, right? This is why biology and our understanding of biology and understanding of human beings is so mired in misunderstanding and oftentimes deliberate obfuscation. And our understanding of automobiles, planes, buildings, and this sort of thing, well, most people don't care. People care about people. They care about their feelings. At the end of the day, we are much less the thinking ape and much more of the feeling ape. And This is also the reason why, probably ultimately, you'll never get through to the average person on any of these topics, be it lookism, behavior. And you might say to yourself, well, why bother? What's the point? And that is a good point, to be fair. But since a lot of normies and or average people are interested in talking about social issues and maybe even making changes, they are missing the forest for the trees because, again, they're not paying attention to the basic building blocks, right? So that is a point where it does actually matter. The question is, how do you get through them? And I don't think you can. This is what leads to what I refer to as sort of cognitive bubbles. You have the sort of average normie bubble. Again, human beings are sort of mystical creatures that are a collection of experiences. Every now and then, there might be some biological thing, like when somebody has diabetes or a heart condition. Otherwise, we're just a collection of experiences, environmental impressions. And then you have what I think is a more accurate view. Human beings are, to some degree, a collection of experiences and environmental impressions. But all of that is just software being inputted into hardware, and you cannot break the hardware if you want to get things done. You have to work with the hardware. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my very generous patrons on Patreon and my generous donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. Without you, this channel simply could not exist. Thank you so much. And if you can engage in the usual YouTube jazz of liking the video, sharing the video, even becoming a sub if you're not a sub, be much appreciated. Until the next time, I will check you out then if I'm still alive. May the gods truly watch over you. Bye-bye for now.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.